Hi everyone, my name is Kartik and my channel is about mental models. In this video, I'll be looking at the first principles mental model. The first principles of a subject or an idea are the fundamental elements of that subject or idea. And thinking from first principle is about using those fundamental elements to arrive at some form of a conclusion or an answer. So if we have, let's say, an idea, we could probably break that idea down further into its components. But then you could probably break those components down further again, because they are probably based on further elements or assumptions. And when you can't break an idea down further and you get to a bit of granularity, these building blocks or these fundamental elements, these are your first principles. Now this is one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that if you know the first principles of a subject, then you can use those to build on those and build up an idea. And so that's what first principles thinking is about. And this exercise of breaking down a subject into its first principles, into its fundamental elements, is achieved through questioning. What, why, how, can you explain things further? And this mode of questioning is known as the Socratic questioning method. Now in reality, this exercise of questioning is very difficult. It's not easy. It requires a lot of mental energy, and so one would typically only do this if they needed to reach an outcome, an answer, or a decision. So let's look at this through an example. Let's say I want to buy a PC. So this is my PC. And if I want to buy a PC, I would probably look on vendor websites or on websites of companies that manufacture computers or PCs. And from looking at those websites, I probably have some pre-assembled options. There's probably a budget option, a mid-range option, and a higher range option. And you could probably take those three base options and customize it further. You could probably take some elements out, add some parts in. And so there's a bit of customization available as well on those sort of pre-assembled options. So by and large, I've got sort of two options available to me. There's an off-the-shelf and a customizable option. Now, if I'm buying a PC, I've got a spec in mind and I've got a budget in mind. And so these are my sort of two options that I've got. I can take something off the shelf, or I can customize it a little bit and get to a closer specification if the off-the-shelf versions don't work for me. Now, thinking from first principles, as I said here, is about breaking down a subject into its sort of component elements, into its fundamental elements. So if we were to use first principles thinking in this, I would break this subject down of buying a PC further. And so I would question how I can get a working PC in my own home and what goes into making a PC. And so with that, I'd think about the various components. So I would need parts. Then there's an assembly required of those parts. Then I would need to install an operating system, because it's no good having parts all connected together if they don't know how to talk to each other. And finally, there's a delivery element to this as well, because it's going to be a costly item and computers are fragile, so there's probably a delivery item. And so now I'm starting to break the subject down of buying a PC a little bit more. And so if I continue breaking this down further, so if I look at the parts, the next thing I would sort of think about is where to buy them. What is my source? There'll be different vendors, and so the different vendors will have different prices for each of the parts. Then we've got the assembly. Now, I suppose I could self-assemble, so me is an option, or I could outsource that. And by outsourcing that, I mean I could ask a friend to do it that knows how to assemble a PC. And so there's probably there could be a cost. And depending if there's a small company that does this, it might be a bit more. Now, if I was to do that, then there may be the element of what tools do I need? I have a screwdriver and a hammer and a drill at home, but I might need something a bit more specialized to put a computer together, and so there might be a small cost in terms of the tools required. What about the operating system? Again, I could install the operating system myself, or I could outsource it to a friend, or again a small company that knows what to do, and there's probably a cost attached to this. And if it's me, I can break this down a little bit further. Again, do I have the knowledge? How do I install an operating system? Do I know that? Can I get that knowledge? How do I get that knowledge? So that's one thing. And then again, the tools. And by that I mean I might need a USB stick, and so there's probably a cost associated with that. And it's not only if I know how to install an operating system. Again, there's the source. Where do I buy these from? And so that's further breaking these elements down. And finally, the delivery. Now, I could sort of avail of free delivery, or again, there could be a cost. And so if I were to get the parts delivered to my home and assemble and put everything together, I might get free delivery, or I might have to pay for it. But if I take the outsourced function or outsourced route, then there might be a small charge in that. And so by factoring all of this together, I will get a total cost at the end. And so through breaking the subject down and employing a first principles approach, I have got three options. I've got my off-the-shelf, I've got my customizable, and I've got sort of this option. I've got three options now. And that's what first principles thinking is about. It's not about sort of saying, okay, we have to go down this route, because through all of this, you might find that this takes 2 weeks, whereas the off-the-shelf option is sort of next day delivery. And so you might not be able to wait 2 weeks, and therefore the informed decision is to go for the off-the-shelf version. Or you might find that the off-the-shelf version is not going to work for you, and time is not all that relevant, but the total cost is within budget and you're getting the exact specification that you want. So thinking through this and breaking the subject down, thinking through the idea of buying a PC and breaking it down further into its components, allows you to make a more informed decision and arrive at an answer, at a decision which is best or better for you. Now at this stage, it's worth me mentioning another concept, which is reasoning by analogy. And reasoning by analogy is, it feels that you are using first principles thinking, but you're not. It's different. So reasoning by analogy is looking at the outcomes for one circumstance or one situation and applying it to another situation or something that you're working on. So if something works here, let's copy and paste it across, maybe a few iterations, it should work on this side as well. And that's reasoning by analogy. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not first principles thinking. An example of that is, let's say we have an area, and this area has high crime. And so the question is that we want to reduce the crime and we want to employ tools, strategies, resources to reduce it. And how do we best do that? And one way of doing that is saying, okay, let's look at the neighbouring area, which has incidentally lower crime, and let's look at the sort of the tools, the strategies and the resources that are employed in this area, and by and large copy and paste them across into this area, because if it works here, it should work there. And there's, again, nothing wrong with this, but this is not first principles thinking. This is reasoning by analogy, taking something that already works somewhere else and using it for another situation. And in this scenario, thinking from first principles would be to break the subject down of what does high crime mean. So you could look at the crime types. Is there a seasonal element to crime? Do the crimes happen at a certain time? Do they all happen in the afternoon or in the early hours of the morning? What about the geography of the crime? Are they all sort of happening in the north of that area or sort of all in the south? What about sort of the transport links? Are there good transport links in this area? Are there A roads in this area which makes it easier to get in and out? And there's probably a whole host of other considerations, but breaking the subject down and looking at each of these components, and then on the basis of these, understanding what the actual root cause is to a certain extent, and then sort of getting to a decision of which tools, which strategies, how we're going to employ the resources to reduce crime. That's taking a first principles approach. And you might, through doing all of this, you might find out that actually just using the reasoning by analogy approach gives you the same answer. So copying and pasting what happened in this area is the same answer through looking at it through first principles. But you've gone through the effort of doing that, and that's what first principles thinking is about. And so it's similar to reasoning by analogy, but it is very, very different. Or it may give you the same outcome as a reasoning by analogy scenario, but it is very, very different. Finally, back to sort of this diagram here. I said that first principles thinking is about breaking down assumptions. And so a good way of thinking about that is, let's say we have a riddle. Let's say you've got a boy that's aged 5 in 2020 and they are aged 10 in 2015. So the question is, when was the boy born? Now, if we look at this riddle, we may use the assumption that, okay, we minus 5 here, and so if we minus 5 again, we get to 0, and so that's the age they're born at. And here we are adding 5, so if we add 5 here, we get 2025. And so the assumption is, looking at the times and ages given in the question, is that the boy was born in 2025. But let's break that down through the Socratic questioning method, and can we explain that further? So what are we actually saying? We're sort of saying that age is decreasing as a sort of the number of years increase. Now, can we have that? And generally, no, you can't, because age is a measure of time, and so as time increases, so does age. So how is this possible? And so we've got sort of one fundamental element here, in that age is always increasing, and sort of age is sort of proportional to time. The other thing is that, can time go backwards? So if we sort of start at 0 and increase the age, the time is decreasing, 2020, 2015. Can that happen? Can timelines decrease? And so if we put this on a timeline and sort of say 2020, 2015, and we've got an age of 5 and 10, and so we're going this way, so age is increasing, we've taken this assumption, but timelines are decreasing, and so going this way, this will be 2010. Is this possible? Can this happen? And the answer is yes, it can happen. And timelines can reduce if they are BC or BCE. And so if this timeline is BC, BCE, then of course time can reduce. And so if we go backwards to 0, we can say that the boy's birth year is 2025 BC or BCE, and that's the answer. And so we've arrived at the right answer. And rather than saying, or rather than assuming that it's just 2025, we've built our fundamental elements, our first principles, and we've got to a more informed outcome. So first principles thinking is all about breaking down a subject into its fundamental elements, its building blocks, and then using those fundamental elements to arrive at a conclusion or an outcome or a decision. And it may not be easy, but one can make a more informed decision, and that's what first principles thinking is about. So that's all for this video. Thank you all for watching. I hope you liked it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one with another mental model. Thank you. Bye bye.